Hi, I'm Kramer Bookman. I'm the general manager here at Tactical Fly Fisher, and today I'm going to be tying the Steely Dam Nymph. This is a pretty, I guess I would say, generic body style of nymph. Just a quill body with a dubbing thorax and an inverting bead. This nymph, I chose this nymph mostly to highlight the Semperfli Perfect Quill. It's a new synthetic peacock quill substitute that we found that gives very good results, has a very realistic look to it, and probably just one of the best synthetic quills that we've found so far. This fly is fairly generic in color. I went with pretty much a mid-tone gray. I tied it today with a black nickel 3.5 millimeter inverting bead. That kind of gives the fly overall a fairly dark look, which would work in low light conditions. You could also tie this fly with a silver bead for brighter conditions. And the color is non-off-putting to selective or spooky fish. This body style lends itself very well to basically infinite variations. You can change up the color of the body, you could change the color of the dubbing, change up the color of the bead to match whatever hatch it is that you may have in your area. You could, once the fly is tied, you could add a thread hotspot collar in front of the dubbing, behind the bead on it. You could use a brighter colored ice dub type material for the thorax itself and spice it up that way. So just play around with it. It's really a template more than it is a specific fly. So play around with it, see how you can adapt it to your particular circumstances. All right, let's get tying. All right, so we're going to start off, if you're using a larger inverting bead, sometimes it helps to put a few layers of thread up here right behind the eye, because just the super glue sometimes won't hold the bead upright. But we'll start off with the super glue. We'll just put a dab of super glue right behind the eye of the hook, and then we'll slide the inverting bead up. Just hold it in place for a second. Just make sure that it seats. So we're using Semperfli 8/0 thread for this on this size 14 hook. So we're just going to build up a thread base to start. All right, so for the tail, you can use Coq de Leon, or I've been using barred microfibbits a lot more recently, just trying to use fewer animal products in my flies. These have been working very well, and I haven't noticed a huge issue with them in terms of changing hookup rates or anything. I just don't think that that's a huge issue. Sometimes they don't come out perfectly even when you cut them off the hank, so you can just put them in a little hair stacker and tap it sideways for a minute and line them all up. I like my tails visually about the same length as the hook shank, or as the fly looks like without the tail. So about like that. We're going to go ahead and wrap all the way forward. Okay, so we're going to separate off one of the synthetic quills from the sheet. We're going to tie it in with the sticky side facing towards you. So the non-sticky side will be touching the hook shank as you tie it in. And we're going to tie it in from the front going to the back. You can wrap your hook to the back by the tail and tie it in there. But what happens is the transparency of the thread lets that kind of dark quill print on the quill actually show through. So it helps to start at the front and wrap back, and then wrap forward back to the bead. So you get 2 layers of thread on the fly, which helps make a more opaque body so that the quill looks better. Now, one thing I will say about these quills is that they do darken the underlying material quite a bit. So if you want a gray, like a mid-tone gray body, you'll want to tie with a pale gray thread. And that would kind of go for just about anything that you put underneath these quills. Okay, as we go, I want to make sure that we get a smooth base, as smooth a thread base as we can. So you just want to spin your thread counterclockwise when you want to lay down smooth layers. And what that does is actually unwraps the thread. And I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but you can see that the thread is actually flattened out and is much thinner as you wrap it. Then when you go to tie in materials or something where you need a little more bite to the thread, you can spin it back clockwise and it'll basically tighten the weave up of that thread and you'll be good to go. So we'll just go ahead and wrap it all the way back up to the front. Now we are going to put a bit of a dubbing thorax on this fly, so we don't need a huge taper because we kind of visually will get the taper across the whole fly from the dubbing. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap back and just build a little bit of a taper into the body of this fly. And again, we're going to just make sure that we keep that thread nice and flat so that we don't get any weird bumps or anything in the body. Come about 2/3 of the way back, change directions. And we'll just come back just a little ways behind the bead. Just a little bit, just give ourselves a little bit of room. Okay, so if you are tying on a standard vise, a fixed jaw vise, then you just can wrap the quill from here by hand like this. Or if you're tying on a rotary and you want to use the rotary with the inverting beads, it's kind of difficult to get that thread to stay in place. So what I do is I'll just take my whip finish tool, throw in a 1 or 2 turn whip finish, and then hang that over my bobbin rest and keep that thing out of the way while I wrap the body. Okay, so now when you're going to wrap the body with these quills, because of the direction that the side of the quill the black is printed on, you pretty much are always going to want the black portion of your quill, and this is true whether you're tying with synthetic or natural quills, but you want the black portion of your quill to the back of the fly. So we're just going to go ahead and wrap this body in the direction that we need to keep that quill on the back of the fly. Okay, get it to right there. Push our bobbin rest out of the way. Okay, secure that with a couple turns. Do a couple in front like that, and then cut this off. And the reason for doing a couple turns in front is that kind of reverses the direction that the quill is laying. So then you can easily bind down any of the little tag that is still there after you cut it off. And it'll be pushing it that way instead of kind of sticking forward past your bead to the front of the fly. Okay, so here we're going to go ahead and put in another quick whip finish to hold that thread in place. And we're going to coat the body with the clear UV resin. And you don't need very much of this at all. This is really just to help protect this quill body from the teeth of the fish or from abrasion or anything like that. And this stuff isn't nearly as delicate as a natural quill would be, but it still is definitely helpful to just put a real thin coat. Make sure you rotate the fly and get all the sides. And then we'll just hit it real quick with the light. And generally, if you have a strong enough flashlight or UV light for a thin coat like that, you don't need much more than about 10 seconds to get it good to go. And then we're just going to put in a little dubbing thorax here. I've got my hairline Adams, or hairline dubbing in Adams gray here. So just pull out a little bit of that. I usually will just moisten my finger a little bit and spin on the dubbing. I like to tie my thoraxes. I like to dub the thread out pretty thin and make quite a few turns, just because that helps to lock in the fibers in the thorax so that doesn't come apart nearly as fast. So sometimes if you dub in too heavily and you only make a 2 or 3 turn thorax, it'll start to fall apart pretty quickly because there's no thread or anything like that running through the actual thorax to keep it in place. So that looks about good right there. So I'm going to take off a little bit of that that's left. take a few turns, okay? And we're almost done. I'm gonna pluck out a couple of those long fibers that I just don't really like the look of. And then take some super glue. We'll just put it on our thread like that. You don't need a whole lot, just enough to kind of lock it in place. And I usually do about 4 turns on the whip finish, because of the super glue. That'll hold it better than pretty much anything else. Trim off that thread nice and tight, and then I like to go back in and put just a little bit more super glue on those thread wraps on the bottom of the fly. Right there. And there you have it.